Hi everyone. Let's see what is social efficiency and how it is measured. We'll be using this graph in order to illustrate it. Here is a conventional partial equilibrium. By partial equilibrium, I mean that we look at one market only. There is only one product being offered for sale. We see its price and quantity. The vertical axis represents the price per unit, whereas the horizontal axis represents the quantity of units. The demand curve, drawn for simplicity purposes as a straight line, slopes downwards, reflecting the notion that generally, as price goes down, consumers purchase greater quantity. In other words, there is diminishing marginal utility, in our course happiness, derived from consumption. The marginal benefit is decreasing. Let's demonstrate. Let's think of a product that costs about $10. What could that be? I can't think of anything at the moment. Let's check what's in the hat. Oh, this looks like a good product. I think my son has exactly the same shirt. Okay, so the product will be a t-shirt. How much would you be willing to pay for this shirt? Okay, so I have some of your answers. Xiong from China is willing to pay $20. Melanie from Belgium is willing to pay $15. Nicholas from Australia said he'd be willing to pay $10. And Camila from Argentina is willing to pay only $7.50. We see that potential consumers are willing to pay different prices for the same product. The first unit produced can be sold to the consumer that values it the most. Here, Qiang from China is willing to buy it for $20. But additional units can only be sold for less. Melanie was willing to pay only $15, and so on. Let's assume there are many more consumers, so that the students whose names I've mentioned are just part of them. This could be explained also if we did not look at the market of people, many consumers, but at one consumer only. Let's think of Qiang. He was willing to buy his first t-shirt for $20. But the benefit he would derive from purchasing a second similar t-shirt is smaller. Therefore, he would be willing to pay slightly less for it, say $18. His benefit from buying a third t-shirt is even lower, and so is the price he is willing to pay for it. As we saw in this course many times before, the marginal benefit from consumption is decreasing. Now, look at the supply curve, drawn for simplicity purposes as a straight line. It slopes upwards, reflecting the fact that the marginal cost of producing each incremental unit is increasing, meaning that the production of each additional t-shirt, in our example, costs more. This is not always true. We know that in the beginning of production, there are often economies of scale, which lower the price of production of additional units. And we also know that in the long run, the supply curve is often thought to be flat. But it is the conventional way to draw the supply curve as sloping upwards. And this is likely to reflect reality in some wide range of production. So let's assume that the supply curve is sloping upwards. This means that the marginal productivity of each input of production, namely labor and capital such as machines, diminishes with each additional unit of input used in production. The diminishing marginal productivity of inputs implies rising marginal costs of production. The prices on the supply curve reflect the marginal cost of production plus a normal profit. If you produce t-shirts, you add more workers and more machines, but then the product of each additional worker or machine is lower and lower. Another way of saying this is that the opportunity cost of producing the next unit is higher. By opportunity cost, I mean what other things the producers could do to generate normal profit with their resources instead of producing this unit. The demand and supply curves intersect. This point is called market equilibrium. There is no inherent tendency to change. Quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. At equilibrium, the price per unit in our example is $10 and the quantity of units sold is 100, because 100 consumers were willing to purchase the shirt at a price of $10 or more. Camilla, who as you remember offered only $7.50, is not one of them. This means that when producing the 100th unit, the opportunity cost was exactly $10. Producing the 101 unit would cost the producers more than $10. Hence, producing it would not be profitable to them. It also means that the benefit to consumers from consuming the 100th unit was exactly $10. Their benefit from consuming another unit, that is the 101 unit, would be less than $10. So the producer who produced the last unit, namely the 100th t-shirt, receiving $10 for it, was just indifferent between producing and selling it or not producing it and using his resources from some other activity that would generate normal profit to him. The same is from the consumer side. The consumer who purchased the last unit, I think this was Nicholas from Australia, namely the 100th unit, paid $10 for it. He was just indifferent between purchasing that t-shirt or not purchasing it at all, using the money for something else. But on the whole, consumers and producers, namely society, benefited from the sale of 100 units. These voluntary transactions created a surplus, that is, social well-being. Let's see how. Before we see it, let me ask you a question. How is it possible that the seller sold the product for $10 and was happy, and the customer bought it for $10 and was happy as well? Do they evaluate the product differently? Did one of them get it wrong? The answer is no. This was a confusing question. I asked only to make you think. The gains to consumers and producers are not made on the last transaction, that is, at the equilibrium point. They are made on the transactions before. When a consumer bought a t-shirt he evaluated to be worth $20 for only $10, or when the t-shirt producer sold a t-shirt which cost him only $5 to produce for $10. Looking first at the consumers, we see that they were willing to buy the first unit, t-shirt in our example, for much more than $10. Xiong, for example, was willing to pay $20. For the next units, there were consumers willing to pay less than $20, but still much more than 10, let's say 19. And for additional units, there were consumers willing to pay, say, $18. Nevertheless, they purchased the whole 100 units for $10 per unit, per shirt, at the equilibrium price. This means that when purchasing the first unit, in our example a t-shirt, for $10, they had the benefit of $10 because they were willing to pay $20 for that first unit they bought. And when purchasing the additional unit, let's say for $10, they had a benefit of $9 because they were willing to pay $90 for that additional unit. And this is true for all the units, up until the last one, the 100th unit, for which they paid exactly what it was worth to them. That is a price that was equal to their opportunity use of the money, and they were indifferent about purchasing it or not. The sum of all the benefits the consumers gained by purchasing units 1 to 99 for less than what they were willing to pay is the consumer surplus. It is well-being created to consumers by the economic transactions. Let's look now at the producer's side. The producers sold all the units in our example t-shirts for $10 per unit. The producer's cost of producing the first unit was much lower than $10. As you can see on the graph, it was about $3. He was not willing to produce and sell it for less than $3, as it had better options for using his resources, namely the production inputs, labor, and capital. The opportunity cost of producing the first t-shirt was $3. However, the producer sold that unit for $10. It therefore had a benefit of $7 in producing and selling that unit. Please remember that we assume that marginal production increases. Hence, producing the 100th unit would cost him $10. The producer's cost of producing the second unit was much lower than $10. For clarity of presentation, because there is not enough space to draw it on the graph, let's look at the 15th unit. Let's say the cost of producing it was $4. The producer was not willing to produce and sell it for less than $4, as it had better options for using his resources. The opportunity cost of producing the 15th unit was $4. However, the producer sold that unit for $10. It therefore had a benefit of $6 in producing and selling that second unit. And this is true for all the units, up until the last one. The 100th unit, which the producer sold for $10, which was equal to his cost in producing that unit, meaning his opportunity cost in producing it. The producer was indifferent about producing and selling that 100th unit or not. The sum of all the benefit that the producers gained by selling units 1 to 99 for more than their opportunity cost for each unit is the producer surplus. It is well-being created to producers by the economic transactions. So now you see why the answer to my question was no. The gain on the sale of the 100th unit for $10, which was the equilibrium point, did not generate the welfare to consumers or to the producers. The gains were generated on the sale of units 1 to 99. The consumer surplus plus the producer surplus are the social efficiency. When the market functions well, all beneficial transactions take place and social efficiency is maximized. This ended our discussion of social efficiency. In the next unit, we're going to see what happens when a tax is introduced.